Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Sekani, a podcast for people in their 20s who are trying to figure out life and not get lost along the way. Today's guest is Ron Sosa, a neuro-inclusive leadership coach, international speaker, author, and executive director of the Uncharted Veterinary Conference. Through his work with Synapt Neuro-Inclusive Leadership, Ron helps neurodivergent leaders navigate the invisible pressures of overthinking, masking, burnout, and constant self-adaptation so they can lead with more clarity, confidence, and self-trust. What makes Ron perspective especially powerful is that it's built from lived experience and leadership experience. As someone who is ADHD, autistic, and hard of hearing, he understands firsthand what it feels like to move through systems that often reward constant adaptation over sustainability. His work blends emotional depth, practical leadership strategy, and workplace design to help people better understand themselves, their and hidden patterns shaping how they work and lead. Ron, welcome to Conversations with Sekani. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be invited here. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. I want you to take us back to your early years, right? So,
Yeah.
growing up, when did you first realize you experienced the world differently from other people around you?
Yeah, I think that there was always this idea as I was growing up that I was probably some alien dropped off in on the face of the earth, right? Because it was this unspoken thing of just not feeling like I fit in a lot of places. And it wasn't until I got my ADHD diagnosis in my mid 20s that things started to make sense. And then it wasn't until my late 30s that I got my autism diagnosis, which then really kind of opened the gates of realization. But when I was younger, it was just always uh this thought or this idea is like why are things so hard for me that don't seem hard for other people, even if I didn't outright show it.
Wow. All right. Okay. So, also, you've worked your way through multiple levels of veterinary medicine and leadership, right? So,
Yeah.
looking back, what were some of the hardest moments during that journey?
Yeah, so I would say in my early 20s, I got the privilege to be in a titled leadership position. And I'll never forget, because I was so excited to be the boss that I never had, right? I wanted to be able to cultivate a workplace culture that was really inclusive and everybody felt validated and heard. And I'll never forget the day I walked in to the business and I had some personal stuff going on with family, and I walked in, and like what would normally happen, I get bombarded with questions. And that day, I think I hit a sensory overload and was emotionally dysregulated. And when I was bombarded with those questions, I kind of just blew up at my team, right? So it was the first time I ever yelled at the team that I was working with. And I mean, there was so much shame and so much guilt. And then there was a lot of questioning of like, well, I shouldn't be a leader. I'm too young for this. I'm not cut out for this. And maybe I shouldn't be doing it. And it wasn't till that moment that I go and actually seek some help, because at the same time in my personal relationships I was having similar frustration problems and easily angered. And so I jokingly say that I went into therapy for anger management and I came out with an ADHD diagnosis, and that really did kind of allow me to understand myself a little bit, give myself some self compassion, and be able to start to work with myself in ways that I hadn't before.
Wow. All right. Okay. All right. First of all, I think your journey is one of strength, actually, and resilience. Why I would say that is most people do not even realize these patterns, right? Some people
Yeah.
might think it's normal, but the fact that you were able to, sit with yourself and understand that you don't think this is normal and you were able to actually go and seek help, right? That first stage of self-acceptance, right?
Yeah.
That's something that not many people are able to, get to, but you got there, you passed there, and now you're helping us, right? So Thank you, Rosa. And yeah, I want us to talk about neurodivergence, leadership, and
Mhm.
burnout, right? So a lot of people they hear words like masking or over adapting, but they don't fully understand them. How would you explain those experiences?
Yeah, so basically masking or over adapting is similar overlap in the definition, but it's changing your behavior, your natural behavior to fit into what society expects is normal.
Mm.
And so for me, it was always trying to cover up maybe how disorganized I was. So it was constantly cleaning up my desk at work, right? I didn't want to appear scattered or disorganized. But inside my head was completely scattered, thoughts everywhere. Couldn't figure out where things were. And so it's those little behaviors. And I think leadership in general asks you to put on a little bit of a mask, right? You need to be cool, calm, and collected. You need to sort of have all the answers. You need to be able to lead people with confidence, even if you've never done it before. And so between that mask, right, of putting on this charade that you're cool, calm, and collected all of the time, even when you are going through hard things as a human being, um, you're not necessarily allowed to show that, or you're not looked at as professional, right? So there's masks for the neurodivergent person who, if you're somebody with autism and has stimming, which is repetitive behaviors that help calm your nervous system, if you do something like that, like a certain type of fidget or a verbal hum or something like that, you can be really annoying to the people around you. And so you learn to hide those things, right? So when I was earlier in my life, I cut the insides of my cheeks, right? I would bite them as a way to stim so that I wasn't outwardly tapping or flapping my hands or like doing any verbal stims that would annoy people around me. I was very self-conscious of that because oftentimes as a neurodivergent person, you're getting so much more negative feedback. I think the stats out there, by the time a child is 10, they receive 20,000 more negative comments or corrective feedback than the non-neurodivergent child. So that's pretty significant. So what you do is you learn to correct your behavior to the societal norm so you don't annoy people around you. And then you sort of lose who you are. And that becomes like the default, and you don't realize how often you're actually hiding the behaviors of your natural wiring. And all you understand is at the end of the day, no matter how easy the day was, no matter how light the workload was, you come home absolutely exhausted, like bone tired. And I don't want to do anything. And I can't show up for my family because just doing that at work is so exhausting.
Wow. All right. Okay. So I'm glad that you mentioned burnout, right? What do you think are like some hidden ways that burnout shows up that people, often miss until it becomes so overwhelming?
Yeah, I think in the workplace we see like high performing people, right? So they can get a lot of work done. Like I am a person, I think if I look at the strengths of my neurodivergence, like I can get a lot of work done in a very short period of time. I've always been like that. The flip side of that is I get frustrated with people around me who don't get that much work done in that amount of time. Um, but I can be looked at as somebody who's like really capable, extremely productive. And if my workplace starts to rely on that level of productivity all day, every day, it will completely burn me out, right? I probably can do the same amount of workload in 2 to 3 days that someone else can do in five, but I need those other 2 days to rest, right? So I can get the same amount of work done, but that doesn't mean I should be that level of high productivity for 5 days a week. Otherwise, it will burn us out or will not show up well with families outside of work. And then that will lead, I've seen many of that lead to relationship failures, which then, leaks back into work, and then just causes other, you know, destructive behaviors to come out and play.
Right. Wow. Okay. So, this conversation reminded me of a guest I had a few days ago, right? She said most high achievers, right, they are put under this invisible pressure. Even
Yeah.
when there's no pressure around, they just feel
Yeah.
so much pressure to get a lot of work done, to always have the answers to everything, right? And this pressure just makes, like, it gets to a point, it becomes so overwhelming, right? So she said, instead of becoming a high achiever, I mean, everyone wants to be an high achiever, right? Why don't
Yeah.
you become a balanced achiever, right? There's a way you can
Mhm.
get work done and still rest, right? It's okay for someone to know that you don't have to have all the answers, right? You do not have to get all the work done. You have your team members around you. You could, give them some work to do. It doesn't have to be you all the time, right? So the goal is to become a balanced achiever, where you could be an high achiever and also live a normal and healthy lifestyle. You don't have to be burnt out or overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly.
You know,
And
the problem we have with that is when you add that level or layer of neurodivergence on top of somebody who's already a high achiever, is that
right.
that becomes the mask that you wear, right? You are
Mm,
typically a high achiever to avoid the negative feedback you receive. So that's all you know. That's the only validation that you've received. And so it becomes hard to separate the high achieving from your self-worth, right? So when you start to take a break or rest, it becomes like your self-worth is on the line, and it can feel really unsafe in your mind because
mm,
all you can think about is the negative feedback you received as being somebody who is lazy, not living up to their potential, not good enough, or a broken person. And so that's what keeps the drive to be this high achieving person into a point where burnout hits. And
mm.
unfortunately, there's even documented cases for autistic people who highly mask lead to burnout and even suicide.
Wow. Hmm. Okay, so I think this also has to do with, the mental, hmm, I don't know, but there's just this place in the head, like you said, right? Once you start not doing some certain things, you feel like you're becoming lazy. You feel like, you're lagging behind, right? So I
Mhm.
think at this point, it also has to do with the mental stimulation or however you think of it in your head, right? So you have to start. I don't know your point of view from a neurodivergent person, right? I'm
Sure.
talking from like someone who doesn't have these things. So you
Yeah.
know best, basically. And talking about, leadership and creating a safe environment, right? So how can leaders now start creating environments where people don't feel forced to constantly mask who they are?
Yeah, I mean, creating a psychologically safe environment is key. The problem is for somebody who's neurodivergent and maybe later diagnosed, they don't always know what they need. They don't
Mm,
always know, maybe they, like for me for a long time in my earlier 20s, like I didn't even know, right? Until I got my diagnosis. So it's really hard to say. What I think we need to do as leaders specifically is to, and this sounds really cliche, is to get curious about behavior, right? I
mm,
like to think, and I'd like to dispel the myth of a toxic team member. I'd like to think that no one shows up to work that maliciously tries to hurt anyone around them or the business, right? Or
mm,
oftentimes, what has happened is you felt oppressed, you felt invalidated, you felt unheard or unseen to the point where those behaviors start to come out, right? And it's sort of like a reaction to the oppression. And so my
mm,
thought is when behaviors are in the workplace that are not ideal, I get curious about what's going on. What's the invisible load, so to speak, that's going on? Are we putting up too much cognitive load on the person? Are we demanding too much of them? Just because they're a high achiever doesn't mean we should be demanding high achievement. We should be,
mm,
like, just like there's a floor, there's probably a ceiling of how much somebody should be producing in our businesses. And if you would go above that ceiling, it's probably not long-term wellness. And there's probably something going on there that we need to be curious about. It's like,
mm.
why are we producing over and above instead of just enjoying the fruits of that labor, burning people out and then turning them over, which is highly costly for businesses.
Right. Wow. Okay. So thank you, Ron, for such a beautiful insight, I would say. So how do you think people can now begin rebuilding confidence after years of masking or burnout?
Yeah, it's a journey for sure, because that mask is glued on pretty tight with all of the feedback we received probably early in childhood throughout our early adulthood. And then, the longer you live with that mask, the more that gets cemented on. I think that we've really got to take a step back and start to like, I hate saying journal or evaluating, but take a look at what your best days are, whether personal or professional. What are the things going on around you? I always like to think about sensory considerations. Like if you have a really rough day at work, like what were the lights look like? Were they a little bit brighter? Were you in a different area? What were the smells? What cleaners are being used? What fragrances are being used around you? Are people wearing strong colognes or perfumes? Like I want to know all of the like things that you touch out throughout the day. Like when I worked in veterinary medicine, we've got a lot of different smells when animals come in. We touch a lot of gross things at times. That we've got medical equipment that alarms and beeps, and there's a lot of sensory considerations. And so for me, what I realized is some of my harder days were not necessarily days where I worked really hard, is when the sensory was too much, right? So when I had, um, really smelly patients come in and the sounds were going off from the equipment on a surgery day and all of and we had a fully booked appointment schedule, I'd be more overwhelmed. And I can have a lower booked day, have all of that sensory overwhelm and feel really exhausted at the end of the day. So I think sensory understanding is probably really key for most neurodivergent individuals. And then figuring out like what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. Oftentimes we are like a fish trying to climb a tree, right? We're trying to do things against our own strengths. And like, let's really appeal to our strengths and our interests and align ourselves with our jobs and our values, to make sure that we're living a life that's for us and not for other people.
Right. Okay. So yes, thank you for sharing that beautiful one with us. Right. I want us to touch on, personal growth and emotional awareness. Right. So your work blends vulnerability with leadership strategy. Why do you think emotional honesty is still so difficult, especially in professional spaces?
Yeah, I think that we have created this myth of the cool, calm, collected leader.
Mm,
Every leader I know, there's never a single person that can show up to work and not bring their full selves, right? Like we go through things at home that can be devastating. Maybe we're caregiving for a spouse or a family member who's going through a hard time. We've got just being a parent or having having pets, right, who are going through something medical. Like, we go through life just like anyone else. And the fact that we can't show up, or we are told we can't show up to be our full selves, I think that's a load of crap, right? Like, we are allowed to show up. That doesn't mean we get to use that as an excuse, but we get to be vulnerable with our team and say, you know what, I'm having a really rough day today. And I think that should be okay for a leader to say, right? If we allow any other team member to say, I'm showing up and I'm having a really rough day and I just need some quiet, or, like, don't include me in this project today, why can't our leaders say that? Like, let's role model what psychological safety really is. Like, we give that to our team, but who's giving it to the leaders? And I think we should be able to give that to ourselves and role model that for the rest of the team to show that psychological safety can spread to all of us and not just have a leader who is looking polished and pristine and never showing vulnerability.
Right. And I think that's actually very important, to create a more safe and healthy workplace for both the team and the leader. Right. So yes, what conversation around neurodiversity do you think we are not still having enough in today's world?
Yeah, I think for what I see often is our workplaces are built on workflows and ideals from probably like industrial revolution times, right? When we worked in factory settings. I think oftentimes we haven't evolved our workplaces to match the human beings and the evolution of human being, whether it be language, understanding, that we have today. And so I think of the trolley scenario as an ethical dilemma. where the trolley's raging down the tracks and there's five people tied up on the main track, and you have the power to hit the lever and have the trolley divert to the side track. The problem is the side track has one person tied up. What do you do? And it's meant to be an ethical dilemma. There's not really a wrong or right answer here because it's a no win. And I think that oftentimes our workplaces mirror that, right? So we can design the system for the many and ask the few to accommodate, or the other way around, which doesn't make sense. And all this time, what I think we should be doing in our workplaces is redesigning the tracks. Like, can we build a third track that now that we understand and know the different diversities within our workplaces, within the human evolution, why can't we build a new track and how we build our businesses, whether it be how we build the buildings, how we create our workflows, how we create policies and procedures, because oftentimes I still see and I think that it's very unintentional, but I still see discriminatory practices happen from a very diverse population, whether it be neurotype, whether it be other things. And I do think it's unintentional, but it does cause unintentional harm.
Mm, mm, mm. Okay, I would say thanks for bringing that to our notice, actually, and then for sharing such beautiful insights, I would say, with us. And yes, I want you to, before we go, right, finally, I just want you to talk to someone out there, specifically younger adults, because that's the sole purpose of my podcast, to,
Mhm.
give advice to young people who feel like they do not have enough clarity, right? So a lot of people in their 20s, they feel pressure to constantly perform, achieve, or prove themselves, right? So I know we've been having conversations around this, but this should be, directed to young adults, right? What would you say to them as someone who has been in such positions?
Yeah, I'd say the most powerful thing you can do as a young person today is get in touch with what your values are. And I think that's a little cliche at times, but I see so many young people now that have never even thought about what their values are. And then what I would challenge you to do is, once you figure out what you think their values are, which ones come from external validation and which comes from fear? Because if either one of those are true, then those are probably values of a mask that you wear and not the values of your person. And so you've got to really dig deep about what your values are. And I think that's really powerful for understanding who you are and how you show up in no matter what environment that you are in.
Right. Okay. One that stood out for me is understanding which one comes from fear and which one comes from external validation. That's the only way we can differentiate between, healthy growth and unhealthy self-abandonment, right? So yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And finally, even though I said finally before, finally again, what is one thing you wish more people understood about neurodivergent individuals in, workplace and relationships?
Yeah. If you could understand one thing, I don't think people are naturally trying to be difficult. We're just trying to understand the world from our own perspective.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think the world should be more understanding when it comes to people who are neurodivergent. I think people generally, not everybody is trying to be difficult purposely, like you said, right? You're just
Yeah.
trying to understand some certain things. But yes, thank you, Ron. I think this has been such an insightful conversation, right?
Thank
Because
you.
a lot of people they struggle silently with pressure that they do not even fully know how to explain, right? So your work is one that gives explanation to things like this, basically. Which brings me to the final segment of my podcast. I call it the rapid fire segment. You could either answer with a word or a phrase starting now. What is one leadership trait that you value most?
Curiosity.
Hmm. Okay. What is a habit that helps you stay grounded
A habit that helps me stay grounded. Is this for me or for other people?
for you?
Yeah. No, no, I'm sorry. That's what I ask myself. That's the habit I ask myself. Is this for me
Oh,
or is
okay.
this for other people? That's the habit I would use.
Mhm. Okay, all right, okay. And finally, what does a sustainable life look like to you?
Uh, it's work-life integration, work-life balance, whatever you want to call it, is balancing what you want your life to look like and what you want your work to look like. It doesn't need to be 50-50, but it needs to be what you want it to make it to be.
Right. Okay. Wow. All right, Ron. Thank you so much for this amazing episode. And before you go, where can listeners get to, learn more about you and also connect with you?
Yeah, there's definitely two ways. One, I'm most active on social media from LinkedIn, and you can find me at Ron Sosa. And then my website is Synapt. It's syn-apt.me, and that's my website.
Synaptics. Okay. Yes. And I'm going to put the link in the show notes so it's easily accessible for listeners. And to my listeners, thanks for tuning into Conversations with Sekani. If this episode sparked something in you, just as it did in me, make sure to share to someone who you think might need this and also subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. Once again, thank you, Ron. Do you have a wonderful day ahead of you?
Thank you so much. I appreciate the conversation.
Okay.